In this episode, we answer the age-old question, what the hell is psychology? All right, hey, welcome back. My name is Michael Sahno, and as you've probably guessed, we are no longer in Michael Sahno Has a Podcast. This is now officially the Sea and Land Fitness Podcast, which is sponsored by Sea and Land Fitness. And today, I'm so excited. I am so excited. I've been trying to get this guy on forever. He has been... Well, we're not going to use the word dodge. Did I just use the word dodge? I think I did. He has been not dodging me, but he is finally here. Dr. Garrett Beatty. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure. And I have been dodging you. I'm a hot commodity.
All right, now
for anyone listening, I'm not really a hot commodity, other than my kids constantly get sick every time we've scheduled this. So I've had a lot of car pickup duty.
But not only that, with the multitude of emails that I wind up getting from you that are not directly sent to me, I'm just in the email chain. You are incredibly busy. So the fact that you're here is amazing. Now you are... All right, are you ready for the CV rundown? You are an associate professor at the University of Florida in the Department of Applied Physiology and Kinesiology, College of Health and Human Performance. Your research focus is the influence of emotional experience, emotion regulation, and attention on motor performance, big science, athlete development, mental skills training, injury rehabilitation, and coaching. And you are the creator of the temporal influence model of emotion regulation, or the
timer.
Yes, the timer model. Welcome to the show. So, you're finally here. Tell us. I would say tell us a little bit about yourself, but can you put a little more a little more depth to all the stuff that I just said?
Like make me more of a human being than a AI professor bot? Yeah, sure. One of my roles here at UF is also the director of academic technology and innovation, and people routinely walk across me in the hallway, or over me maybe, not across me, and say, "Hey, tech guy, we have a question." And I always think it's funny because not many of them know that I actually have a farm, and really, like when I get home from work, the last thing I do is want to pull up any technology. So I'm a farmer tech guy, I guess, maybe, to make me a little bit more interesting than just this sport psych professor guy.
Well, that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize about Florida, and especially where Gainesville is. Gainesville is in the heart of Florida farm country, so to speak.
Yeah.
And how is the farm going?
It's going well. I actually was doing some chainsaw work on some trees yesterday with my son. So
get out of here.
Yeah.
Now, how old is your son? Tell everyone.
He will be 7 in May.
Did you have him working the chainsaw?
Oh, he was juggling them.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well,
no, the timer... safe distance, 100 feet or more away, and then until it's turned off, and then he's on lift the limb duty for now.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, so your main focus. So I actually have a question before we get into it. So the first question is, what is sports psychology? But as you answer that question, can you tell us why sports psychology is in the Health and Human Performance department and not the psychology department?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer the question, what is sports psychology, and then we'll kind of naturally get there.
All right, cool.
or maybe unnaturally, as we work through it. It may make more sense why I just said that. So simply stated, and this is going to be like painfully obvious, and you're like, okay, who is this guy? Sports psychology is just the application of psychology to sport, which seems really simple, straightforward, but then you start kind of unpeeling the onion that is the broader field of psychology and all the subdisciplines within psychology. So there's clinical counseling psychology, which is really mental health focused. That can be applied to sport. There's cognitive psychology, so decision making, information processing. That can be applied to sport. Social psychology can be applied, teams, leadership, fan behavior. So every subdiscipline that exists within psychology has an application to sport. And so the concept of what sports psychology is can get really confusing really quickly as you start looking at these nuances and then all the specific expertise areas that individuals in the broader field of psychology have. In terms of how sports psychology at the University of Florida found its way into a kinesiology department, it's not an uncommon model. Most kinesiology departments started in a department of physical education back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s when state-funded universities were emerging and physical education became a big component of the national educational agenda. And then over time, as science evolved, the physical education moved more towards a kinesiology and physiology focus, much more basic science leading. So you see different sports psychology departments that are in kinesiology departments. You see sports psychology departments that are in colleges of education. And then you see sports psychology departments or units that are within psychology departments within the United States. This model varies depending on if you're in the United States or even different states within the United States, or if you're looking at a European model or Australia, New Zealand. Depending on which country you're in, you're going to see it kind of emerge in different places. For the end user, the customer, the athlete, the coach, the parent, I think those nuances are important to know when you start looking or shopping around for a sports psychology professional, to know that there's many different training paths that might, lead somebody to work as a sports psychology professional, and really knowing what you or your athletes might need, and really kind of ask questions of those professionals to figure out where their particular area of expertise might be.
Okay, because one of the things that I find is that, like you had mentioned, there are the disparate paths. You have the goal setting. You have the literal neuropsychology discipline itself, and those are so. You would think that they are so far apart, but they're used in this psychological symphony, this which the body can't even be removed from it. The physiology of it can't even be removed from it. So it's a good marriage. So how did it develop? How did it come to be? And why do we need it? That's a loaded question.
Yeah. How did it come to be? The origins, if you're going to open up a sports psychology textbook that any undergraduate taking a sports psychology course would take, it's
or
going to
graduate, or graduate.
The history of sports psychology, at least in the United States, traces back to the kind of turn of the 20th century, so in the early 1900s. There were some experiments that were done looking at pacemaking, so how people moderated their pace on a physical activity task. And what the studies basically found is that if you were doing it in the presence of other people, you worked faster than if you did it alone. And so the concepts of motivation applied to movement emerged from there. Then there was some development. Coleman Griffith is often cited as the father of sports psychology in the United States. He was doing some work at the University of Illinois and I got hired by the Chicago Cubs for a couple years to do some applied sports psychology with them. It didn't work out in the end. They had one successful season, one not successful season, and then that was it. And then over time, you start to see these delineations within the field, where it moved away from just performance optimization until mental health components came in, and then social psychology components came in, industrial organizational psychology came in. So all that just kind of has evolved into this buffet, really, of sports psychology expertise that we have now available to anybody looking for help in those areas. But what the field has really lacked is the ability to help, I think, inform the customer of all those options and really figure out how to figure out the expert they're looking for. Why do we need it? It depends on who you ask. I mean, a lot of athletes would say they don't need it at all. There's other individuals, myself maybe included, that might argue that we all could benefit from this, whether we're an athlete or not. At the end of the day, if you think about the human as a platform of performance, we work much like a computer works. We have, I'm looking at my desktop computer, we have all these information processing capabilities in our brain, and that brain at the end of the day is what helps us decide what to do. And then once we decide what to do, how to actually execute that. And from the day we're born until the day we die, that unit is constantly adapting to all the information that comes to it. It adapts to what we do in response to that information, what feedback we get from it. So if you watch a 2-year-old try to walk, they're really clumsy. And the reason they're really clumsy is because they have a ton of neurons, actually more neurons than they'll ever have the rest of their life. And they're all firing and communicating with one another. And so their bodies are just flailing around, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And every single time they fail, they fall, they stub their toe, they try to feed themselves and they miss completely. That's feedback that their brain and their nervous system then responds to, and it adapts over time and they get better and better and better. So we do that throughout our lifetime in understanding how that process works, the process of learning, and particularly learning movement and skills that you would see in sport or other performance domains is really important and fundamental to teaching and coaching. The other aspect of it is as soon as we get into stressful performance environments, emotionally evocative environments, environments that have the perception of really high impactful consequences to us as humans, to the way that other people think about us, anything we value, all of a sudden that brain that we've trained can completely shut down and do things in unpredictable ways. And so sports psychology can help make that less likely, both in the way that we train our athletes or the way we train ourselves in our day-to-day activities. If you train in an environment that's similar to what you're going to encounter, you're going to be better prepared for that. If you get into a situation where you're encountering something novel or something that stresses you out or makes you anxious or really emotional, having a tool bag of skills to help manage that and get your brain back into an optimal performance setup or performance motivations or emotions or any of the psychological factors that influence performance can be really impactful in being successful or unsuccessful. So that's why I think we need it, and I do think we all need it, myself included. And it's like I don't know if we should joke this way on this podcast, but I'm based on some of our past conversations. But it's almost like a Baptist minister that's up there preaching, very fervently, but also sweating. Because deep down they know that they're as much of a sinner as everybody else that they're preaching to. When it comes to performance, whether you're a coach or an athlete or a sports psychology professional, we're all limited by the hardware that we were born with and that we've trained, and we all can benefit from just incrementally trying to manage all the things that we interact with psychologically day to day.
Now, how does just to go back a little bit, it seems like sports psychology, and if I'm correct in this, it evolved from occupational psychology, and you hit on the doing a task in public around others cause the task to be increased it became more economically sound to have people around. They were what's the word I'm looking for? Um, they were able to do the task quicker
Mm-hmm.
around other people. So would it have been sold to the Cubs as, because for back then being a baseball player was a job. It wasn't like we see it as this pinnacle, this evolution of performance, this pedestal that we put athletes on. Oh, they were put on pedestals back then too, but if you speak and you look at the history of baseball, they were these guys looked at it like a job. So is that how it was kind of sold back then?
I'm not that familiar with the history of this to know
It's
the
okay.
details. I can speculate, but anybody listening, take this with a grain of salt. This is complete speculation. Uh, you know, Back when Coleman Griffith would have been hired by the Cubs, baseball was the NFL back then, not literally, but that was the top league in the United States. And if I recall correctly, the Cubs were one of the best funded organizations. So I think it's no different than now. These organizations are looking for competitive advantages. Owners, general managers, whoever's running the show is looking for any edge they can get. And I don't know the story, but my guess is a guy knew a guy who knew a guy who knew Coleman Griffith and was like, hey, you should meet this guy. And they met him, and he explained all the interesting things he was doing. And they're like, we need this guy. And it worked for a little while until it didn't, which is a recurring theme within the field of sport and sports psychology, and the pressures that do exist within those industries to win immediately. And the way learning happens, the way that sports psychology works, it's not an immediate solution. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a simple pill that you can take. In many cases, it takes years of practice, a lot of unlearning, a lot of, taking apart and dismantling some of the bad habits we picked up from our parents, our early coaches, when we try to figure out solutions on our own that may not have been the most efficient or effective. Also dealing with things that are happening in our lives, because we're not isolated to just performers, but things that are happening externally. There's a lot of things going on. And the way we think about the world around us, the way we react to that, it's a constant moving target. So it's dynamic. And so to be able to do that consistently and to help people perform at their optimal level consistently, there's a lot of variables that contribute. So my guess is it's not, like most things in human history, the way that story played out is not all that different than the way it plays out for current sports psychology professionals working either in the sport industry or other industries that hire such individuals.
I'm curious. The reason I ask is I guess I'm curious when it became sort of professionalized. I know that the APA, it's the redheaded stepchild in psychology, so to speak, but within the organizations themselves, not the accrediting organizations, but the actual organizations that use it. When did it become standard? Is it standard to have a sports psychologist? And if it is, when did that occur?
Yeah, I guess it would depend on when you define standard practice, right? But the short story is it took a really, really long time. I mean, almost 100 years, really, before it became widely accepted. You're testing me, Michael, on
I'm
my
sorry. I'm sorry.
of
It's
my
just
field, right? But if memory serves me correctly, the U.S. Olympic Committee and really the sub-organizations within the USOC were really the first to adopt it and really embrace it. I believe that organization was the first to have an list of not certified, but individuals that met the USOC criteria to be a sports psychology professional with USOC athletes. And again, my response is biased to the U.S. model. So Europe, even nations within Europe, Russia or the USSR, they had things that were going on around the same time too, and kind of divergent paths to where they started and where they've ended up. And then really, you didn't see a ton of adoption at a systematic level really until more recently, within the last 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
After the USOC, I would say the U.S. military was probably the next to embrace it, although probably not super public, which I think is probably obvious why they may not. I mean, if
Well, the military used, so we'll talk about this distinction in a moment, but the military used performance psychology for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's where trying to think about the history of it's difficult because it depends on which subfield of psychology we're talking about, what label was applied to it, what the kind of end goal was for the application of it. So it does get cloudy pretty quickly, depending on how you're going to define that. Golf's interesting because you have these teams of individuals. You have a professional golfer, and then all of the individuals that support them as a team. But golf adopted it pretty early. Tennis adopted it pretty early. So the individual sports were the first. Now, Major League Baseball, if not every single Major League Baseball club, almost all of them have a team of sports psychology professionals. And then the NCAA, within the last decade, put a huge emphasis on mental health of athletes. And when that occurred, the inclusion of an individual with expertise in psychology working with athletes increased across the board. Those models vary quite a bit, but the predominant model is a mental health model. So you're thinking about clinical and counseling psychologists working with athletes at the NCAA level. Less so of a performance optimization model. Not that that doesn't exist. There's some NCAA athletic departments that actually are doing both. And not just a single individual. They're looking for individuals with diverse training to build a team.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do these clinical psychologists who come on NCAA teams, do they have the skill set?
Hey, Michael, I lost you on that question.
No, I got you back. I got you. Do these psychologists that the NCAA brought on to these teams, do they have the skill set to work on motivation? Do they have the skill set to work on sports psychology as it's defined?
As it's defined, I think is the tricky question.
Yeah.
They certainly have the skill set to work with athletes from a mental health model. And the concepts of motivation, emotion regulation, attention, recovery from stressful events all apply to help athletes perform better. I think I would draw the distinction between a performance optimization focused sports psychology professional and a mental health focused professional. Is with performance optimization, the goal is almost exclusively performance optimization right now.
Okay.
At this moment, over time, our focus, our interaction between, if I were the sports psychology professional and the client, would be how do we get you better at your trade? Whereas the mental health model is how do we get you as a human being better at being a human being and being the best version of yourself that you can be for your own personal goals and health and well-being. And so there is some nuanced distinction there. I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. The way I describe it in class to students is, well, I'll pose a question like, do you have to be mentally healthy to be really good at sport? And we have plenty of examples where that's probably not the case. Like you can be mentally unhealthy and still be really good at your trade. Then the question is that sustainable? And I think that's where the answer is almost overwhelmingly, if not unanimously, no, it's not sustainable. My take is we really like the perfect model, if resources are unlimited, is we need a team. We need it. The field of psychology is so diverse. We need a team of experts. We need specialists that specialize in the sub-disciplines of that to be able to really adequately and fully help the athletes, the coaches, the organization to optimize their performance, because we're pretty complicated, it turns out, as human beings and how we function. The problem is that the results-oriented nature of sport and military and anything along those lines, there's always this emphasis on return on investment. So how many wins is this worth? How many home runs is this worth? How many lives saved in a military campaign is this worth? And with psychology, I think it's really difficult to measure. Mental health, I think, is...
It's longitudinal, I think. I think it's... So you're right. It absolutely is difficult to measure, but it's almost as if we don't spend enough time in exploring it to see if it actually works.
Yeah, preaching to the choir. You're not going to get an argument from me on that. I do think more money should be invested in this space from organizations, and more resources investigating, like data-informed practice. So what are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not working? Why is what we are doing that's working, working? And why is what we're doing that's not working, not working? And then incrementally get better at that, so that it is truly, a scientific practice of applied sports psychology. That, to me, would be the gold standard. I don't know how many places that exists systematically anyway. I know there's many organizations that are attempting to do this.
The University of Florida.
Well informed enough to speculate on how effective it is at this point.
So the University of Florida is implementing that with their sports programs. I've spoken to people on the women's swim team, the track team. There are a lot of sports psychology as well as mental health resources for the athletic department.
Mm-hmm. And the NCAA member institutions have invested widely in this space. Again, you get many divergent models as to what a different athletic department might do from another athletic department. But even at the mid-major level, there's job postings almost weekly in this space. But again, the desired criteria and expertise for those individuals varies quite a bit.
Now, since there are so many different models, is someone taking a look? Is someone using it as a piece of research across time to say, okay, North Carolina's doing this, University of Florida's doing this, University of Washington's doing this, and looking at the actual performance data? Do you know of anyone who's doing that right now?
No. While that kind of study would be really interesting and worthwhile to know, it would be almost impossible to pull off. The closest thing you get to that kind of study is more of a systematic review, where you would go through the process of defining what each organization's doing just as a comparative study. After that, it gets really difficult, arguably impossible. I would lean towards impossible to link whatever those models are to the performance outcomes, because there's so many different variables that would contribute to improved performance. First and foremost, the single most important variable in success in any type of movement domain is the platform you're working with. So how good are the athletes that you have? And if you have bigger, stronger, faster athletes, you're going to win more often than not. And again, this is why I think there's not as much investment in the sports psychology world as maybe I would like to see, and many others in my field that would like to see more and see the value of it, is when that is the number one most important thing, you're going to see the most investment in recruitment, evaluation, investment in those athletes themselves, if we're talking about a professional model, so how much they get paid. Because the difference that sports psychology makes is when all else is equal, the team, the organization, the individuals that have optimized their psychological approach, that's who's going to win. But we're not at that point where there's so much talent in the talent pool that there's enough parity for sports psychology to be looked at as, all right, we need the best sports psychology team to be our winning edge. Right now, it's just a luxury or a necessity from a mental health approach that organizations are viewing it.
Because one of the things I just had like a big brainstorm, two big brainstorms, and one is if there was some type of database that could be put up where all the different organizations could feed their data into, and then we could, you're the tech guy, we could just kind of sift through with this chat GPT or whatever. We'll find something. But we could, if we could set up some type of database and ask different organizations, would you be willing to submit your data to this? And then we would have all these different data points. We could actually look at how all these, or get the NCAA on board with something like this, so we could have a big hard look at what is going on. I think that would be an awesome thing. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing my doctorate. The other thing is, you mentioned something, recruiting. Is sports psychology used in recruiting? And I'm curious how it would be used. Are there batteries that recruits fill out so we can say, not definitively check this guy off, or oh my gosh, this guy has all the little things we need. I'm thinking of the grit scale that was done by Duckworth, and I'm curious about that. Is there anything, one, the database, but we'll hold off on that, and we'll maybe have a side conversation about that. But the in recruiting, is sports psychology used in recruiting? I'm sorry.
I can't imagine that it's not.
Yeah, right.
No, you're fine. Like I can't imagine that it's not. And by saying that, I mean
But that sounds like
I
some
would be
witch doctor
shocked
stuff.
if it's
You
not.
know what I mean?
Yeah, so there's and the reason I say I can't imagine that it's not is there's a long history of it being used, but being used inappropriately. So, like any questionnaire style battery that you might have, it should only be used in the way that it was designed for. In most of those instances, it was designed for an experimental standpoint or a research-based standpoint, and not really to evaluate talent. And there's certainly been a history of where individuals within the sports psychology field developed assessment tools that were intended for research purposes or intended for intake purposes from a mental health model, where coaches have gotten a hold of them and used them to evaluate who they were going to start or who they were going to recruit. And that is a very slippery slope, just in basic terms of ethics, but also efficacy. Like, you would never use a hammer to try to drill in a screw, or you might, but it wouldn't work very well. You might destroy things in the process. And it's kind of the same concept here, is if a tool was developed for one purpose and you start using it in a different way, that's pretty dangerous. Any type of systematically evaluated assessment tool also goes through a long process of testing out the psychometrics to see what the reliability is, how well it applies to different populations. When you start talking about social psychology in particular, time matters. So if it was developed in the 1920s versus the 2020s, there can be some huge differences in whether or not that tool is appropriate anymore. But you do see it, like the combine, the NFL combine, there's tools. Like, I don't know if they're still using the Wonderlic, but it's kind of a cognitive psychology tool that's been used, and it's been argued that it's been misused and misapplied in that context. I do think we'll see more of this, and you kind of touched on the AI component to it. AI is going to have a dramatic impact in the sports psychology world across all industries, but I'll speculate on what I think it might have an impact in sports psychology. One is one-on-one interaction with a sports psychology professional can be cost prohibitive for many many athletes. Short of the elite level collegiate professional that can afford it, it's really not all that accessible because the training it takes to get to that level takes a long time. There's not a lot of sports psychology professionals, at least not those that have recognized designations, and it can get really expensive. Anybody that's played around with these conversation bots like ChatGPT, Bing AI, Bing Chat, which is essentially the same technology, just kind of on top of the Bing platform, you can have real conversations. And I know there's instances within the sports psychology field where people have requested different types of psychological skills intervention training plans, and it spits things out. Some of them are accurate, some of them are hallucinations that the AI comes up with, but eventually these AI tools are going to iterate and become more and more clean. I also think there will be instances where you see companies or individuals operating as companies that will actively work to build a platform. If you can imagine an app on your phone or an app in the metaverse, if we go down that path as a society, where you have a personalized sports psychology professional that's really just an AI. Like, this is no longer science fiction. This is certainly imaginable and probably imminent within the next 3 to 5 years that there's going to be an opportunity here for that type of thing. From an assessment standpoint, I think when we think about skill acquisition and the way that people learn skills and apply skills, that's definitely a sports psychology application of the subfield of cognitive psychology and learning, parts of psychology that talk about learning and how the brain develops. So you could very easily develop dynamic sport-specific tools to assess and evaluate athletes' abilities to know, understand their trade, make decisions within their specific position. The way that virtual reality, augmented reality, rendering's going, that's not unimaginable either, that you have somebody going through a training session without any competition, not physical competition, but what the athlete is seeing is physical competition. And whoever's running it could manipulate that to see what the athlete knows. So it is probably being used. I don't want to say it is being used because I can't point to any specific teams or organizations that are doing it, but I would be shocked if they're not using sports psychology to evaluate talent. But I do think what is being done now is going to be viewed as not a joke, but 10, 15 years back, we were like, whoa, that was cute. That was really cute. We're trying. Our hearts were in the right place, but maybe we were a little bit unethical there. Probably shouldn't have done it that way, but man, we weren't effective like we are now. Look at what we can do. So I can't imagine a world in which, if we're still competing in any domain, that the interface of AI and psychology applied to performance is not going to become a major aspect of where organizations are trying to get a competitive edge. I lost you again. I couldn't hear that.
I got you back. So you hit on something really interesting. So there is a misconception in psychology. There are a lot of people who use sociological things to describe psychological phenomena. So there's a confusion between psychology and sociology, where psychology deals with the individual. It's why it becomes difficult to make one size fits all types of solutions for psychological issues, because it's the individual. So because of that, this is interesting. An AI would need to, so think about the assessment. Think about even on the physiological level. We need to do a physical assessment of a person. We need to do a psychological assessment of a person. The AI is going to need to do a learning assessment of the individual that it hopes to help. So you'll have to have, about, let's say, half an hour of conversation with the AI, in order for the AI to pattern itself to understand your personality, your outlook on life, all of these things. Not just so with a person, we do that immediately. We have that conversation immediately. But if we were giving the AI doesn't pick up on, you're acting a little deceptive. Is there something deeper we need to talk about? Or, wow, you're really gregarious. It won't be able to pick up those nuances, so it'll have to go through this assessment type of period. But then from there, and that's actually one of the things that they're saying in the Bing model, is that you need to ask it a couple of questions for it to actually get to the answer you want. And why did I bring all that up? Because now I'm thinking if we can do something like that, we can actually reduce our workload, so to speak, on we can use the AI to free up the sports psychology professional in terms of the assessment, and then focus more of the sports psychology professional's time into actually generating some type of personalized psychological skills toolbox for each of the individuals. Am I off on that?
No, I think that's definitely one potential path where this could go. I mean, when you think about the limiting factor for most organizations, we talked about having a team of specialists. That's really expensive. I mean, you're talking about having 5 to 10 people to cover all the specific academic domains or expertise disciplines that are out there. And even within those, you'll see some variations. And then if you're talking about, an NCAA organization, so a member institution that has anywhere from 10 to 30 teams on it, maybe more than that, and those teams have athletes. How many athletes in a 40-hour week can one individual see? Within that, can they actually build that client-practitioner relationship that's needed? It's been a long time since I took a helping behavior counseling skill type of course, but the one thing that stood out to me the most was apparently the number one predicting factor of whether or not a practitioner is successful is really how well the practitioner and the client or the patient, if it's a mental health model, work with one another. So there's this dyad component where they have to work well with one another. And I don't know about you, but I probably have less than 10 really close relationships in my life where I actually know enough about somebody to be able to just pick up a phone and call them and say, hey, what's going on? Oh, that's interesting. How'd you do this? And to ask a practitioner to be really good at that and make the individual that you have a business transaction going on, but you also need to make them feel like a human being and feel like they're in a safe space. That's a limiting factor in that world. And one of the reasons why it's so expensive. So I think that could happen. The really cool thing about the AI technology is it allows for these individual instances of the AI. So, right now we interact with Google a lot, although that's quickly being replaced. Like, we all use the same Google. It's kind of, tweaked and fine-tuned for us geographically where we are, what ads in that geographical region are being spent on, so that if you're like, I'm looking for a restaurant, you're like, oh, look, there's 3 restaurants that pop up immediately. Well, why did those 3 pop up first? Because there's some ad generation there going on, but it's not telling me stuff that's in New York City or in LA. It's telling me stuff that's close by where I can actually spend money on right now. The AI world is going to allow for the complete upside down version of that, to where there is a Google Garrett, and it's my personal Google, and it learns about me. And then by nature, I'm going to learn about this AI, and we're going to start working together as a team, and we're going to start functioning as a team. And my guess is it's going to go in every single direction that you can imagine a human dyad, so 2 individuals working together, and all the things that can go wrong and all the things that can go right. But over time, it will get more refined. Presumably there'll be some guardrails added to limit the opportunity for it to completely derail. But these things aren't unimaginable now, and I think that's the really cool thing is you could, like, you bring in, I'm just thinking about baseball and how many new draft picks they have every year and how many different minor league teams they have. There's no real way to effectively cover that many athletes and develop personal relationships without sheer brute force and having tons of people on staff. Whereas if you have this customizable, individualized AI, then all of a sudden you've got one-on-one help. And like you said, after those experiences, then maybe somebody needs more personal human-to-human contact, and that's clear with the data that are present, and then you target somebody that way. So it might allow for these types of decision tree organizational structures that are in place. It does bring up another interesting aspect, though, that you pointed out, and that was that human-to-human interaction and what happens there. How do we optimize that? Does it matter? I think it does. We're talking about human beings. We're talking about human being problems. It's going to be hard for an AI to completely replicate that, at least currently, but we'll see. That's one of those fascinating questions that we'll have to see how society plays out.
I am just trying to keep Skynet from going online. So my plan is to make friends with the AI and get it so invested in me that it just, the Terminators never come. So there you go. We have gone like around the world around 12 times in this conversation. We've got to wrap it up. Is there anything you'd like to finish with? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm sorry. Is there anything that is important to you? We're going to do this again because all of our conversations, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Beatty and I, he's my advisor. He's also my friend, and we spend hours talking to each other when I can get a hold of him. But anyways, we're going to have to do this again.
And for free. I don't charge at all. Yeah, if you'll indulge me, the one parting shot I'd like to take is if you want to get good at anything, this is a quote that I tell students all the time, and I'm trying to make it a thing to where I hear it one day just walking down the street from somebody that I've never talked to in my life. And I'll be like, oh, I made an impact in this world. But the things you spend your time doing are the things you're going to become good at doing. That's just the way our brains and our nervous systems work. So if you're trying to get good at something, do it the way you want to get good at doing it. And be okay with the mistakes and the errors. Learn from those. They're just data. Get better. Incrementally get better. Keep doing it the way you want to do it. And you're never going to be perfect, but you're going to get close if you keep practicing it the way that it should be done. If you don't, you're going to be good at doing it the wrong way. So just remember that whatever you spend your time doing, your brain gets good at doing that.
That's awesome. Dr. Beatty, thank you so much for being here. Stick around for a few minutes. All right, everyone. That's the show. Again, Dr. Beatty, thank you so much. It's an honor to have you on. We're going to have you back. We need more farm updates. And our next conversation is going to be, why is it a sports psychology professional? Okay, that's an interesting debate. All right, thanks a lot. I will see you guys next time.